Welcome to the March 2018 Guild 21 call. This is the 10th week of the year, so we're already 1/5 of the year completed. As a public service announcement, remember, Saturday night, roll your clocks forward. Time changes. Let's get into the call by starting out with the oath. Guild 21 oath. If you'll read it with me. We are repairers, insurers, and vehicle manufacturers who hereby declare the possibility of aligning our industry to a common vision, which puts the consumer first. We stand for sweeping innovation. We commit to transparent, customer-focused solutions. We are accountable to invent a radical new future where safety, efficiency, and a cost-effective process are our guiding principles. So this call today is going to be part 2 of the reviewing the joys of scanning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to George.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the call. George Avery here. I just wanted to touch base with you just for a second about the Verifax Symposium. You know, I'd mentioned for a year or so on this call that I was going to MC that, and obviously it took place. It was a great meeting. It was a day and a half of some excellent speakers. If you had a chance to attend, what I'm going to mention here is a couple highlights you'll certainly remember. For those of you that were invited that didn't have a chance to attend, if FARSM does this again, I don't know if he'll do it next year or the year following, but it is an opportunity to talk frankly about the issues in the industry, and it's in an environment that's pretty safe to do that. And even as the MC, I'm continually amazed that there wasn't really any sales pitches for Verifax. So it just shows the commitment that FARSM has to provide an opportunity to visit with the stakeholders. And as a result, we had some great. Our own Hart Logan, who is our host, as you know, on every call, pretty much started the conference off with sharing some direction in ways that the industry needs to think about themselves as they move forward. Sean Carey rocked everybody, I think, with his future vision was what's happening with the OE. You know, how the OEM is taking a place in the collision process and a little more than most people think. And it was unique when Sean got up and did his talk right at the pivotal moment where he was talking about what he believes is going to happen next. The building blew a fuse and his mic went dead. Nobody would leave. Everybody just sat there going, I want to hear the other part of this. And we got him back up and running, so it just gives you an idea of how powerful that was. We had some talk about recycled part usage, especially welded-on recycled parts from Honda, which was good. Kristen Felder had a segment on Love Your Customer, and when you hear that title, you just think it might be a little soft, wishy-washy, but I'm telling you, she rocked the group with her perception of how you should deal with a customer. Jim Will, also from AAA, talked about the Texas Honda issue. Had an attorney there that talked pretty frankly about what we need to do in the industry. And I think last was Andrew Fastow. If you don't remember that name, Andrew was the CFO of Enron, and ended up spending about 6 years of his life in federal prison as a result of that. And he talked about culture and how the industry, as far as Enron, would get going. The culture just started doing things a certain way, and even though they may not have been exactly right, they just that's what we always do, and we always did, and it's been successful, and on they went. Went down in flames. I have to say, there was a lot of, he did a phenomenal job making some connection to any business, but primarily to the auto body repair business and all the different stakeholders and how we operate, and it was very worthwhile. FARSM is having some additional conversation with him, and I don't know if in the future we'll hear from him again, but if you're part of the Guild call and you see Andrew Fastow as part of a Guild call, and who knows if it would ever happen, but if it did, I would not miss it. So just one last thing was, and of course we got Jake and Doug and Bram on the line. to talk about, and Hart will take over and do a little introduction here to make sure everybody knows who we've got on. It's kind of like part 2 of this calibration test. But I did want to mention one thing that came out of the symposium, and that was scanning was pretty much front and center with most of the speakers. Of course, Mike Anderson was there, but I think what my takeaway, and I'd be interested if Jake and Doug and Bram want to comment on this throughout their presentation. But the takeaway I had was that scanning was front and center, and there was a lot of frustration, primarily, from all stakeholders, but the insurance industry, I think, was the inconsistency in the price. And what I saw is that there's always inconsistency in price due to competition, right? That's just kind of how that works. But there seemed to be a lot of the reason for inconsistency is what had to be done on each individual car. I mean, down to just taking a mirror off. And I wouldn't think twice when I was a technician about doing anything other than taking the mirror off, putting it back on, and getting on to the next job. And these simple steps all have interwoven connectivity with calibration. And so researching all of that, and I hope that Jake and Doug talk about that responsibility to do the research, because that's the part that just kind of hit the industry or hit the symposium kind of like a wet blanket. And I don't mean that in a real negative but just from the standpoint that it's like, wow, we need to do this, okay, and wow, is it different, and it varies, and how long it takes to do it, where you have to do it, and driving the car, and the space to perform the calibration. I mean, it just started to get real heavy, and I hope that, and again, I think having Doug and Bram and Jake back, it'll be a benefit. So with that, I'd just like to turn it over to Hart to introduce our speakers and enjoy the call.
Yes, thank you, George, and welcome back. I'm excited to welcome back Jake and Doug, sort of for part 2 of our earlier call. I just want to express my gratitude and real quick observations of the symposium as well, which is that there were some tough conversations and some really amazing introspection. And the ability for the people at the symposium, and really for everyone in Guild 21, to be willing to have these challenging, thoughtful, questioning, certainly space of unknowing and trying to figure out, is really, really inspiring. And it makes me feel much, much safer when I get on the road, and makes me feel like things really are changing and moving towards, ultimately, a much safer driving experience for everyone. So I want to thank all of you for being there and or being on this call. So thank you. Before I introduce our speakers, who will be familiar to all, hopefully all of you, I wanted to remind you how you can interact. And we really are hoping that you will interrupt, ask questions. We're really here for that. So if you want to ask a question, press 1 on your phone. If you have a burning question I need to know right now, please stop talking. I cannot move forward until we get this question answered. Please press 2 on your phone. And if you're really appreciating what you're hearing, you want to send a little silent acknowledgement back to the speakers, please press 5 on your phone. 5 is the equivalent of applause. We also have a screen share feature, so you can follow along as we're talking. So if you go back to your invitation online, your email, you will see a button that says screen share. Please click on that, and then you will be able to watch the slideshow go by as our lovely gentlemen are talking. So to introduce our lovely gentlemen, we spent a lot of time introducing them last month, so I'm going to give the Cliff Notes version today. So we have Doug Kelly, the CEO of Repairify, and he's more excited than ever to be working in this industry and for the future. Jake Rodenroth, actually, he is the Director of Industry Relations at Aztec, absolutely repeated what Doug said. In fact, he said, I share those values. I'm so excited about the future for our company and the industry, and just feel fortunate and excited to be a part of it. And we are fortunate enough to add a third member to this triad, and that's Bram Paris. He is the Director of Calibration, and he does the majority of their research and development work in Plano, Texas. So without further ado, I will turn it over to these lovely gentlemen to go back to part 2 of 2 months ago. Doug and Jake, take it away.
Okay. Yeah, Doug, you want to take it, or you want me to take it?
Well, yeah, I was just going to thank everybody. First of all, we did get great feedback from the last session. We did have questions following that, and received a few coming into this call. So again, I think it was encouraged that folks kind of speak up and ask questions, realizing that there are no dumb questions in this case. We're all kind of learning together. And I think the second piece we want to just offer is that, I alluded on the last call about how, scanning is just the precursor to something much bigger and more complex on the calibration front. We really didn't have time to even touch on that subject. So today, time permitting, we'll get a little bit deeper into what we see coming on the horizon. And it's not even that it's that far off. It's cars today that are being produced, put on the road that need this activity done, and many people, quite frankly, don't understand that yet. So hopefully we'll, with the help of Guild 21, start to get the message out that there's a whole nother piece beyond scanning that needs to be looked at.
You want me to advance to the first one there, Doug?
Yeah, go ahead, Jake. Did you advance the slide? There it goes. So I'm going to actually ask Bram to speak in some detail on the next few slides. As mentioned, Bram has been in the industry his whole career and has been focusing the last couple of years specifically on calibrations. And so we picked a Mazda here and just a simple system, the blind spot monitoring system. And the reason we picked this one was just to highlight the fact that even though the system is described the same way and from a vehicle owner's perspective behaves the same way, there's actually 3 different variations of the same system. And it wouldn't be obvious to anyone looking at the vehicle. So in other words, the lights that illuminate, the way it interacts, at least from the perspective of somebody driving the vehicle, you wouldn't know. So as repairs, obviously understanding the difference between these 3 different systems and, what's involved in putting them back in working order becomes critical. Jake mentions all the time about doing the proper research. So step 1, know what the system is and what version you're working with. And the second thing is with these 3 different systems, there's actually 2 different ways to calibrate the 3 different systems, depending on which one it is. And there's a new device that you'll see here in just a minute called a Doppler, which, I got a kick out of when I first heard, but what's it sell for, Bram? A couple $1,000s?
Yes.
And most dealers at this point still don't have one on site. So I'm going to turn over to Bram. He's going to describe in some detail as to what versions of this system exist and how they are put back into working order.
Well, I'd like to preface this by saying this is a very basic overview of a system that is in the big picture of ADAS is a basic type system, which is blind spot. We all know blind spots are subjected to the driver. So, when we talk about blind spots and calibrations, it's not as critical as we're talking about a front radar sensor or windshield camera that may, indeed try to stop the car. So even with a system as basic as a blind spot system as we're talking about today, Mazda, as Doug mentioned, has created, probably through research and development on their own part, 3 different systems that outwardly to the customer don't look any different. The indicators are the same. Everything appears just like it would be if it was a prior owner of a Mazda, early Mazda vehicle, and they bought a brand new one. They would not be able to tell visually that it was a different system, but they do definitely work different. They react different to their environment, and they're also calibrated differently. So there's definitely key differences to the systems. BSM version 1, which is going to be the early builds, I don't have the info here as to what year they started that, but if we look back at early driver assistance systems being adaptive cruise control and AEB that started in 2008, we know these systems have been around for 10 years, and we're just now scratching the surface on calibrating, when in reality this has been something that really needed to happen all along. So we see that the version 1 is mostly 2016 and older Mazda vehicles. It doesn't, unless you break down and try to look at each model, it doesn't tell you specifically, other than the few that we'll see here on version 2 and 3. You know, the systems are drastically different in what they do. Their sensing areas on the early systems are small. You see it's 23 feet. If you actually take a car that's typically, 12 to 15 feet, or so, that's not a lot of sensing area. 15 or 23 feet doesn't give you a lot of space for it to pick up the car and tell you it's in its blind spot. Also key to that version 1 system is the fact that it's not, I don't want to say it's a stupid system, but it's just not as smart as the newer systems, whereas it can't detect a car coming into or leaving the blind spot. It just knows if something's there. So, and again, this is all subjective to the driver's blind spot. So this system may only be in 23 feet, may or may not detect a vehicle in that person's blind spot. If they're, very short or very tall, that could definitely play into what they call their blind spot. If you see the picture there, the reflector, that's the reflector that's required to calibrate that system on the version 1. And Mazda says if you take the bumper off the car, of course if you take the sensors off the car, they suggest calibration, which they actually call it a radar test, Mazda does. So basically you're verifying the system is indeed detecting the area that it's designed to. And if it's not, then that normally means that there's either a defect in a sensor, a bracket, or the actual metal that the sensor or bracket's mounted to. And that kind of is a brief overview of version 1. We move on to version 2, which is the interesting one. So you can read, it says it's only applicable right now to the 2016 through 18 CX-3 and MX-5. Those are the only vehicles that have version 2. There's not a good explanation as to why that's the case, but that's the case. And we don't know if that's going to be anything into the future or if it's just going to cut off at these models when they change. So it is a Doppler-based. One thing to reflect back on the earlier version, the version 1 system is radar-based, which they're all radar, but the version 2 and 3 are both Doppler-based. So you can see that the difference in that being, one of the major differences is the detection area is significantly larger at 164 feet. So if you think about that in relation to the size of a car, that makes a huge difference in the vehicles that the car can warn you on. And also that system is much more intelligent in the fact that it can actually detect a vehicle entering that zone and exiting that zone, and it monitors the speed of the vehicle, your vehicle, the Mazda, and also the vehicle that's entering that spot, which helps the system better determine if it needs to warn you. Of course, if you turn your turn signal on or something and there's a vehicle in that sensing area, it's going to flash the lights at you and make a noise. Go ahead.
And Bram, we actually have a question for you from a Selvi Rizik. So we're going to, Selvi, I hope I said your name right. You are unmuted. We are ready for your question. Selvi, are you there? I can hear some banging around. Selvi, do you have a question for Bram? I don't know if you need to unmute your phone. All right, Selvi, unfortunately we can't hear you. Bram, I'm sorry to interrupt. Selvi, if you have another question, please feel free to hit 2 on your phone. Thanks so much. Sorry to interrupt. Bram, go ahead.
No problem. Any interruptions are welcome. So we, if you see it, the picture at the bottom of the slide shows a picture of the Doppler simulator. That's what Doug was referring to. It's kind of fun to say because, Doppler simulator. And that device is specific to only the version 2 cars. That's the only cars that need the Doppler simulator. It is a piece that costs, a few $1,000s. And as of the last that I know, the only way that the dealers could get that is to request it. They actually had to submit a tool request, and they pay for it. They basically rent the tool, and it's shipped to them, and then they have 2 days. And during that 2 days, they can use the tool on as many cars as they like, but they have to return it or pay a penalty or of some sorts if they do not return it. So it gets packaged up and shipped back and forth between dealers to use on specifically these models. When I saw that, I was very surprised, and we actually encountered firsthand a dealership that did not have one, and we didn't have one at the time, so we had to basically wait the 2 days, wait for the day, and then the car sat there for 2 days being calibrated. So it was a very interesting situation. But that Doppler simulator, what it does is it's designed to simulate a vehicle in the blind spot so that when the system basically pings, it sends out its radar signal and waits for its response. The Doppler simulator sends back a response so that the vehicle will, during the radar test, tell you if the system is, if the sensors are mounted correctly and working as they're designed. So that's what's unique about BSM version 2 on Mazda. As the slide comes up here on version 3, you're going to see that the systems between version 2 and version 3 are very similar in the way that they function. What's interesting about this is that, as Doug mentioned, and I kind of prefaced a little bit with, is that to a customer, to a consumer, these systems are all the same. They're all advanced BSM systems. That's how they're labeled, and they all fall under the iActiveSense package that Mazda calls it. Each one of the manufacturers is creating their own ADAS equipment packages, iActiveSense, or whatever it is, and the BSM falls under that. But to the customer, it's all the same. And I really would bet that most of the consumers out there don't know the differences in those systems. And it does tell you in the owner's manual how the system works, but how often do we grab those and read about how our car works all the time? I probably do that, but I don't know that a lot of people do. I haven't seen the slide transition to version 3, so I can briefly go over. The version 3 has the same detection area. It has the same technical benefits of being able to sense a vehicle going into or out of the blind spot area, the detection area, and it does monitor speed and distance just like the version 2. So version 3, the difference is the way it calibrates. The version 3 system uses the reflector just like version 1. It's exactly the same reflector used in version 1 with very similar setup procedures, and the procedures are all very similar across the line of what it's asking you to do. There's measurements involved to set the reflector or the Doppler simulator in a very specific place so that you can then test the vehicle and know that it is within the OE specs, it is within calibration. And again, if there is a problem, most of the time that means there's a problem with the sensor, the bracket, or the mounting area on a Mazda. You're not really changing what the sensor does, you're just testing to make sure that it's functioning correctly.
That's an important distinction, right, Bram? Because some manufacturers, you're actually, quote, calibrating the laser. In this instance, you're just confirming that it's in the right location.
Correct. There is a level of calibration on the Mazda, but if we were to take the same system on like a Toyota or Lexus product, when you calibrate the vehicle, you're actually setting you're normalizing the system to where the reflector is set. The important part of that across any vehicle line is that if you put the target in the wrong spot and calibrate the car, it's not going to warn you. It's not going to tell you did anything wrong, but you can calibrate the car incorrectly. You basically have set its center point to be at the incorrect spot. And that's why these calibrations are so important to be done correctly and per the OEM specifications. When we talk about OEM repair procedures, these are some of the most detailed there's a lot of detailed out there, but these are very detailed procedures. These aren't simple, go out and place the target about here. It gives you very precise measurements down to the millimeter on where to put these systems, and there's not a lot of variance in some of them. Some of them only give you about 5 millimeters of tolerance if you're looking at camera calibration. So it's very important that the OE procedures get followed to the T, and the OEM equipment is used to do that.
Yeah, and in the interest of time, we'll have to move on, but I just want to say that, having witnessed what Bram's doing here in our calibration center, to think about tire inflation, to think about a full tank of gas that the car can't have in it, a set of golf clubs or, anything else. Basically, it has to be put at its original state, and then you start from there. we've seen instances where it can take multiple hours to set these cars up to do these kind of calibrations. So when insurers or repairers express frustration around pricing, a large part of it is a lot of this stuff's new, right? We just heard blind spot monitor, three different systems, and then you multiply that how many different manufacturers and how many different systems on cars, it becomes pretty unwieldy pretty quick. But that in a nutshell is just one example of what as an industry we're up against going forward. So Jake, back over to you.
Thanks, guys, and I really echo what they're saying here. I mean, when you look at the way that Target is set up on a neutral colored floor, a level floor, you can't do these calibrations out in a parking lot, where there's striping or potentially an unlevel floor. Very, very serious. And that kind of leads into my slides here. I put together a couple of brand new vehicles that I wanted to share with the group to highlight that this is not going to get any easier. It's going to get more complex, in fact. So there's things that I think as repairers we're missing the boat on, fundamental skills that we've overlooked throughout the years. Things like battery disconnects, how to take a lift gate off, how to change a headlight, even changing a fender, taking a mirror off. These are all steps that we do every day, but what we've failed to realize that in the last couple of years, those steps have changed. And you'll see that according to the way that vehicle is trimmed, there's certain additional steps that must be done in regards to basic calibrations, drive cycles, all kinds of things. So I want to show you the brand new CT6. The CT6, a vehicle that came out in 2017, changed slightly again in 2018, and I wanted to talk about that. So show a little picture here of the substrates. There are 13 substrates on this vehicle, and if the joining methods are not followed correctly, you will fail to have electrical continuity throughout the car. So that means the vehicle will cease to have a ground. So you could have the problem with the vehicle starting, you could have headlight issues, anything electrical that requires a ground. If certain procedures aren't followed on the body structure, you could have a problem. This is the Bose Panerai system, and once again, something that changes with trim level. Only the fully loaded CT6s had this. There are 34 speakers in this car. So I think about collision repairs and the amount of interior trim that we take out for protection and for welding operations and things like that. Did we plug them all in? And these are systems that don't report to a dash light. So these are things that can easily be missed that will cause heartburn when we go to deliver that vehicle. This is the new
Speaking of, sorry, just before you jump to the next slide, we do have another question from Trey from Collision Repair. Trey, you are live.
Hi, I had a quick question about the Mazda slide. Does aftermarket wheels throw in a bunch of variants? I mean, how do you approach that with a customer and tell them if you have aftermarket wheels, isn't that going to change your ride heights and being able to aim everything?
Yes. And unfortunately, the OEMs have not yet issued a procedure that allows for aftermarket modifications. In fact, most of the repair procedures strictly say, equipped, OE-equipped, wheels, tires, the whole 9 yards. And we would know that going forward there would have to be something that gets put in place for someone that has changed their vehicle. So that yes, that is a valid question, but there is no procedure now in place to allow for that.
Okay. Well, thank you, guys.
Yeah, that's a great point. Vehicles that have been modified in the aftermarket, I think of special needs customers like handicap vehicles, trucks that have lift kits, all of those things will play a role. So that's a great point. That kind of leads into the new system for Cadillac CT6. This is the Super Cruise capability, so it's level 4 autonomy for the Cadillac. It only works on approved highways. So as you can see there's a map of the approved highways for Cadillac. And the vehicle has GPS connectivity, so it knows when it's on an approved highway and would allow you to engage Super Cruise. You also have to have a full OnStar subscription because this vehicle has the ability to stop on its own while it's under Super Cruise if a 12-volt power source is lost. So a very intelligent system and uses a concert of sensors throughout the car to make sure that system is working properly. So like I said, not going to get any easier. This is a look at the new A8.
And I hate to jump in again. You have another question because you're answering
them
so well. We have David Ludwig. David, you are live. David, you might have pressed mute on your phone. Just make sure your phone is unmuted. David, are you there? All right, so I seem to be unable to hear David. So sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No problem. So to move on to another luxury vehicle, this is the new A8, a vehicle that has historically been aluminum since '92. Will be hybrid construction coming in 2019. So this is something that will change, again, how that vehicle is repaired, different joining methods on this vehicle as well. It is considered a mild hybrid. It has a 48-volt electric system on board, so some concerns there. It is has an electric supercharger, a 9.5 horsepower electric supercharger. It is also turbocharged, so it actually leads a traffic light under full electric power. So this is where those fundamental skills that we have to research play such a big role. Things like battery disconnect and making sure that our employees aren't electrocuted when they service a vehicle like this. So it's certainly a car that very few people will get to work on, but it gives you insight to the future of where cars are going to go, and you will see this kind of technology in entry-level vehicles at some point. So another article that recently came out was an article on active hoods. So it was a really well done, and we dug into it on our weekly webinar, and I wanted to share it with the group. So this is a pedestrian protection system. So it's a low-speed system. So under a certain mile per hour, it goes active. But essentially what it does is if it impacts a pedestrian, maybe in a parking garage or in a grocery store parking lot, it actually elevates the hood at the rear by as much as 4 inches on certain vehicles. So this is the Buick Regal. It kind of talks about the rope impact sensor. So this is an impact sensor that is embedded inside the absorber right ahead of the rebar behind the bumper cover. And when you look at it, you need to treat these systems very much like a live airbag system, because if certain procedures aren't followed, you could either injure the person working on it or cause additional damage to the vehicle, which could lead to insurance, bill payer friction and obviously delays. So this is a look at the repair procedure. And like I said, there's the rope impact sensor there with the 2 little green ends on it. And there is a very specific enable and disable procedure, very similar to airbags and to hybrid vehicles, how there's specific enable and disable procedures. I think the thing that jumped out at me is that the bumper cover has no repairability. It has to be replaced if the system is damaged or impacted. And it says that it could cause faulty readings with the impact sensor if it's repaired. So I try to think about all this technology that's coming at us like a fire hose, and how does that affect us in the repair center when we're trying to repair plan around this, and we're trying to figure out parts and communication to the bill payer and so forth. So as you go forward, this is a look at the actuator on the back side of the hood. It is a pyrotechnic device that hits the back side of the hood, and the hood and hinges and both actuators have to be replaced on the Buick, in the Buick's case, if they're activated. So I think about technicians that may be leaning on a bumper cover and the system's not disabled. You could have a deployment and cause damage to the car. So there's certain vehicles like Mercedes-Benz that has a similar system that has a reset procedure where it doesn't damage the hood and it doesn't damage the hinges. But as you can see, the same type of technology is different across different manufacturers.
Wonderful. And we have another question, I hope he's there, from Brandon Chittenden. Brandon, you are now live.
Hey, Jake. I'm aware that more and more of those pedestrian safety systems that pop the hoods up have been coming on board, starting with the Euro models some years back. Are you aware of a full list somewhere of vehicles equipped with similar systems and how they work, and if they have reset procedures or if hard parts actually need to be replaced if they're activated?
Yep. So that's a great question, Brandon. I think the article that was written here recently talked about the new Volkswagen Arteon that's supposed to come out in 2019. I haven't seen repair procedures on that one yet. I'm sure they're in process, but the ones that I've seen that are resettable so far are specific to the Mercedes-Benz vehicles, the E-Class in particular. The Nissan GT-R has a deployable hood as well. And I think that it's important to understand that this today is an option. Not all cars had it. The base cars may not have the active hoods on there. So it is a trim level item that's added to the vehicle. The Volvo has a little different spin on this. They actually put an airbag underneath their hood. So whenever it strikes a pedestrian, it actually inflates an airbag for the pedestrian to land on that's just underneath the cowl panel. A very large airbag, I might add. So, each OEM is kind of taking a different stab at this technology, and certainly there's some out there that are going to increase severity because of the parts that are damaged as part of the deployment. But I think to answer your question, I think that a list could be worked up, but I know I haven't personally put one together yet.
Thanks, Jake.
You bet. We wanted to open this up to a lot of questions because I know we had some from the last call. So please don't be shy with any questions in regards. We put together a couple of slides just to share, but we're seeing a lot of things on a national level that we'd be willing to share with folks if they had any questions.
Yeah, so
Art, any other questions coming through?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you have any other questions, please press 1 on your phone. I believe, and I think you may have answered, you had some questions ahead of time. I think you might have, I think it was, do you recommend charging for our employee to connect the scan and assist in 0-point calibration and seat weight sensitivity checks?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And specific to that question, that's around Toyota Lexus vehicles. It's important to understand that procedure changes by model. So an Avalon is going to be different than a Tacoma. A Tacoma is going to be different than a Tundra. That's why it needs to be researched on every vehicle. For a long time, Toyota had a crib bulletin out, number 177, that really discussed that procedure in detail. They did make a change to that crib bulletin to where it went from being checked after every collision to being checked if there's a collision DTC that's been triggered. So that's an important change that shops need to be aware of. So I would say on a car-by-car basis, don't try to remember all this stuff. Just focus on the operations on the vehicle and trim level that you're working on at that moment and look those items up so you're not surprised. So, yeah, to answer the question, I would say that those seat weights and the additional calibrations that are required on the car, those need to be fully documented on the repair order, and they are not included because they're different for every vehicle. And I would definitely highlight that out in detail.
Okay. So we have another question coming in. I just need to figure out who raised their hand. Here we go. From John Huter. John, you are live. And John is gone.
John dropped off.
We lost him. All right. I noticed that we have a hand up from Brandon. I'm not sure if it's a question or not, but Brandon, do you have something you'd like to add or a question? You are live.
No question.
Button push. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So we did have another question sent in to us. So I just want to remind all of you, please press 1 on your phone with any questions. But here's another one that was sent in before the call, which was wondering, are you currently coming up with ways to handle calibrations that require test driving and staying connected?
Okay, so that's a fantastic question. We are looking at that without giving away too many company secrets there. We are definitely looking at that where we can see wheel speed data and stuff like that to where we're connected to a cellular network. But another part of our business, a lot of people know us just for the Aztec, which is fantastic. That's great. But we're also expanding our mobile footprint across the country to where if specific problems exist that can't be handled over a wire, we want to send in our SWAT team to help deal with those. And that's something that specific drive cycles that may be required. Bram is in charge of our first calibration center that you saw kind of the floor there in some of the pictures, but Bram is in charge of that in Dallas, and we hope to scale those across the country as well. So we want to be a service that helps fix the car, however we choose to do it, whether it may be over the wire, with mobile, or the calibration center, and a combination of the three. So it's yes. The short answer is yes. We are working on that as well.
Great. And I think we have a follow. Oh, I just unmuted Trey. Trey, you are live. We seem to have a little bit of an echo, but Trey also has a question, which I have a feeling is going to be a follow-up.
Yeah, I just had a question as far as when you guys do more mobile, are you going to be able to start really working on being able to flash certain SRS modules or ECMs? Because I feel like that's another big obstacle as far as in repair procedures or repairing in general.
Are you say that one more time? Flashing what modules now?
SRS modules or ECMs if you have to flash a whole new one, or is that going to be a part of the mobile? Or
yes, sir,
I know sometimes
it will be. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is definitely something that's going to be part of the mobile. You know, we want to make sure that the vehicle is. There's certain things that we don't have control over, like making sure the battery is supported with the right device so that the vehicle accepts programming. So absolutely, that's something that we're working integration to where we may do the pre-repair scan over the Aztec using over the wire, but identify that a module needs to be programmed on the post scan, and we'll set up a mobile visit for that so that we don't, have any problems with any programming and making sure the vehicle's battery supported the right way.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. That's another one of those fundamental skills that very, very few people look up is how to battery support a car. There are certain OEMs that have a specific voltage that they want the car at, and that's something that's really key. So we want to make sure we have somebody at the store to do those types of operations.
Hey, Jake, this is George. So one of the things that comes up is kind of the cadence of what you do in the repair process. And at the symposium, we heard a lot about, and you even said that you need to start looking up and doing the research every time, kind of regardless of what you do. I know a lot of people know this, but could you speak to maybe the cadence from the insurance side? And when I say the insurance, I don't mean just, writing an estimate, because I'm sure that the repair procedures would be the focus, but there's just common sense that from an insurance perspective that a request comes in and it just doesn't sit. I mean, just like you're not sure what's the the cadence for the insurer to validate, check, double check, inform themselves and others. Is it just repair procedures? No,
I think that from the insurance side of things, I think that vehicle they at least look at what trim level it is right before they insure it. So is it a premium plus Audi A6 or is it a base model? And I think they have to understand that if it is indeed a premium plus model, then it's going to have the most available modules for that platform, and thus its repair procedures will be different. And I think that's why you really see manufacturers like Audi and BMW and some of the others that don't have position statements around pre and post scanning. And that's because their cars change on their repair procedures change trim level by trim level. I know in the Audi's case, the new Q7, in 4 years' time, it jumped from 60 control modules to 120, depending on how it's trimmed. So, where you could look up a rear axle procedure on the base car, which is just a standard axle, on the fully loaded Q7, it's an electric axle. So it may have a completely different repair procedure. So I think that from an insurer's perspective, when they're writing an appraisal or trying to settle a claim, they need to really look at the trim level really close to determine what kind of care from the collision side or the repairer side is going to be required. And it's going to change. It's going to continue to change. So like Bram said, the OEMs are naming a lot of their technology suite, different things. Honda, for instance, is Honda Sense. So Honda Sense will be standard on all 2018 models. So even the base car is going to have things like lane watch and forward collision warning and things like that. So and I tell you, the rental cars are seeing it too, where a lot of their vehicles are coming standard with things like forward collision warning and blind spot. So one thing that we're looking at in the calibration center is what's the effect on repair versus replace? What's the effect on parts usage? If I've got a 6-hour dent in the quarter panel that's equipped with blind spot, should that radar test be done after the vehicle is repaired but not painted to confirm the fix? So there's a lot of those kinds of variables that we don't want to see a car get repaired, painted, and then fail the radar test. So there's very little tolerance in regards to where these modules are aimed. Bram, I know that you've seen a lot of that firsthand. and it's going to continue to be a question. And we want to help the OEMs put procedures around that so that existing collision measurement systems can be utilized to confirm the correct position of these modules.
Jake, can I interject real quick? Also, just real quickly, these systems also include the around view cameras, the 360-degree view cameras that are on vehicles. That's now part of those safety packages. So, the Nissan, Honda, Sense system, whichever system you're talking about, those little cameras in the grille or in the mirrors are part of those systems now, and the calibrations for those cameras is almost as detailed as what would be needed for a radar or a front windshield camera. So it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I helped a shop the other day through a brand new F-250 with a 360 cam, and he said we can see the camera, it comes on when we put it in reverse, but the guidance sticks don't move with the steering wheel, and that was the customer's complaint because he uses that to line up his trailer and all that kind of stuff. And I had to show the shop some tough love. I said, did you research how to change the liftgate? And I got a real long pause. And when you do that, it tells you that, number one, the Ford emblem is one-time use. But number two, if it has 360 camera, you have to use a scan tool. So here's a manufacturer that doesn't have a position statement on pre and post scans. But in regards to that particular operation, it says to use a scan tool to lay down the calibration mats and make sure you have the dedicated space and all these things. So it kind of goes back to those fundamental skills. Research the operation and make sure that you have all the little things that could become potential pitfalls in the repair.
Thank you. It looks like we have John Heater back on the line. So John, you are unmuted. I hope we don't lose you this time. Please ask your question.
Sorry, Jake, I hit the hang up instead of the unmute. Anyway, on mine. But just a clarification. You mentioned that on the crib bulletin that it's a collision DTC. What's a collision DTC? Is it just anything that was triggered at that mileage key cycle number at the point of loss, or is it like there's a specific set of them?
Well, that's a fabulous question, and what I always tell the shops is that crib bulletin kind of leads into their other crib bulletin that they release, which is 191. That's their pre and post. That's their pre and post bulletin, right? So what they're trying to see is that when you pull that fault code out of the car, you need to enter it into Toyota TIS or whatever third party that you're using, and look at the flow chart. Look at the diagnostic flow chart, and that will identify the components, the system, those types of things that are responsible for triggering that fault code. And then as a shop, you need to determine, is that a collision-related DTC or is that a maintenance-related DTC? Not all DTCs are for the collision. Some of them are pre-existing. So I think that you really need to be able to draw that line in the sand to the DTC that's in that car. So that's kind of what they're looking for. And that's what we try to coach our shops on, is find the point of impact. Show the DTCs that are related to the point of impact. And that might be just a communication error because you took the door handle out, right? So those are things that I think that really leave that cyber fingerprint for all parties to see it, right? So that's something that is going to be handled at the store level.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. And Christopher Speck, you are now live.
All righty, thank you. So I kind of have a question relating to, I think, something that's probably on a lot of our minds as repairers, and that is being compensated for the scans. So I think a lot of us understand the importance of it with both the position statements and with repair procedures. But what would some advice be as far as having that conversation with adjusters who are either uneducated or just haven't been taught the importance of repair procedures? How can that conversation go?
Right. So that's a great question. I guess for me, a little bit about me. I was one of the first repairers on Jaguar's authorized aluminum repair network back in 2004 when the XJ8 went aluminum, and this was before F-150s were aluminum. So as you can imagine, I had a really tough time negotiating, educating, and discussing why this car is different than any other car, and it really ties into the diagnostic conversation as well. It's so new to the collision industry, we're not really sure what's up and what's down. So I would say that I could grab any repairer and say, tell me the operations that are required to put that car back whole. And they would say, well, it needs a bumper cover, a liftgate, a tail light, and an exhaust system, right? And I would say to research each one of those so that you're not surprised by anything, and you're going to find diagnostic steps along the way. Another one that you want to look at is repairs and inspections that are required after a collision, and that's where your occupancy detection systems, there's certain visual inspections to seat belts. Volvos have a system called WIPS that's a mechanical restraint that must be inspected after a collision. So these are the kinds of things that need to be, number one, identified. But as you print the documents, don't just hand them off to a bill payer or a customer. That's not their love language. They're not used to seeing those kinds of things. At least a lot of them aren't. So I would go through and highlight the items that I want them to read so that it tells them why we have to do it. And I think that will help you in the reimbursement stage. And it's certainly, it's kind of like showing your math when you do math problems, right? It shows how you got there. And I think that would help you.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a burning question from Jonathan McAlpin. I know burning's exciting. So, Jonathan, you are live.
Hey, sorry, I didn't know if I was asked the question, but was curious about how many manufacturers might be utilizing timestamps with dates or mileage when those codes do draw. Or do
Great question. So those timestamps, they're delivered a variety of ways. So it's not just in time, but it's also in key cycles. Sometimes we can see what engine RPM that a certain fault happened, or what the coolant temperature was, or things like that, right? Not every system is monitored as well. So that's another key component there. Where the engine ECU may be monitored, that doesn't necessarily mean the body controller or the blind spot system is monitored. So I think today that information is limited, at least across domestic and Asian platforms, and compared to the European platforms, they record that stuff pretty good. My personal opinion is that I think you're going to see more of it, that it's going to get better. Because I think that the OEMs face this on the mechanical side as well. Did this fault happen before the vehicle ran out of warranty or after? Before 36,000 miles or after? I think there's a lot of things that are goodwill at a dealer level that are given away that may not be related to the warranty at all. So I think that it's going to be in a manufacturer's best interest to put freeze frame data in the vehicle on a consistent level. It certainly will help ease the conversation in regards to diagnostics and collision. So it is available on certain systems, but it's not as robust as we'd like to see it.
Thank you. That's great.
You bet.
Thank you. And I believe we have another question from Trey. Trey, you are live and on the line.
Yeah, I had a quick question as far as, say you are repairing a quarter and you're changing it out. Do you think enough is doing as far as just comparing, the side that you're changing out to the old side, enough to help get it in the right area? Because I feel like there's a real lack of, is this quarter in the right place? And that seems like that would be a whole lot of stuff you would have to do to take the car back off a frame rack, measure it then and then put it back on to make sure your quarter is even in the right place. Do you guys have any ideas on to help and better streamline that maybe?
Yeah, there's a couple of, I think that doing a symmetrical measurement to the other side is definitely a good start. There's certain manufacturers that the quarter panel may come with the blind spot bracket separate, and you have to weld it onto the panel, and did you put it in the right place? I think that doing any kind of measurements in those areas is definitely good practice. But you have to be careful even with replacement quarter panels, not just repair. If you don't follow the sectioning or full replacement guidelines very closely down to the measurement, you could have a similar problem. So I think being as preventative as much as possible, as early as possible, gives you the best chances for that vehicle accepting a radar test confirmation. Bram, I know that some of the Mazdas are very sensitive around blind spot module placement and damage to the bracket and things like that. Is there anything that you can share on that you've seen doing calibrations for us?
In my experience on calibrations for blind spot, there is a little bit of, wiggle room, if you want to call it that. They know that those brackets and the metal are, there's some level of give there. But when you look at it, when it fails, if it fails due to the angle of the sensor, that's a fairly significant sign that something isn't right, whether that's a repair issue. We have gone to shops that were quarter panel repair and dealt with the repair not being true to, didn't match the other side, and it was definitely enough to send that sensor off, basically too much of an angle that it couldn't pick the reflector up. So yes, that is something we are definitely seeing currently.
Yeah, something else you want to really look at close is paint mill thickness on the bumper cover and repair material on a bumper cover. You got to remember that blind spot module has to penetrate that bumper cover to reach the outside world. And if you change the thickness of the plastic or the mill thickness in the paint, there's a lot of shops out there that are fighting static on those bumper covers. And painters don't really fix static; they just deal with it. They just put more material on. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that wasn't our problem because there weren't radars and sensors in the bumper covers. So really look at that close. It seems like the ones that have moldings that are recessed into the bumper cover and they're having a hard time getting paint into the edges and things like that, we get all kinds of crazy errors from the blind spot module. And their first instinct is just to replace the module, only to find out that the problem remains. So really watch repairability and mill thickness on those bumper covers.
And Jake, one more thing about that. When you said that, it jogged a memory. Some of those blind spot sensors are not mounted on the quarter. Some of them are mounted to the bumper. If you look at the Toyota trucks or Hyundai Kia, where they're actually mounted to a plastic bracket on the bumper, GM, same way, that makes a huge difference in what you do to the vehicle. The whole bumper could be off on a truck, from side to side. The actual angle of the bumper could be off, so one sensor is higher than the other, and that will definitely cause a failure in calibrating a radar.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So we have time for one final question. We only have about 3 minutes left. James, you are live for our last question.
So actually I have two questions. We're having vehicles that are leaving here even after we scan them, and they have to cycle through some starts and stops, or they have to be driven a certain amount of mileage before the computer is resetting, and then trouble codes are getting popped onto the computer at a later time after the repairs are done. So I'm kind of wondering what would be a way to deal with that. And also, one thing I've thought about is potentially a customer clearing their codes before they bring the vehicle in for repairs, and then they'll have trouble codes that we won't even know about until the vehicle's here, and then they start popping up as the vehicle's here because the customers just reset their car right before they dropped it off.
Yep. Wow. Okay. So that's a loaded question. So I'll do my best on that one. So I think first and foremost is identifying the recommended drive cycle by manufacturer for each vehicle you service. Hart, I'm not sure how to share this, but we have an Excel spreadsheet that we built that has the recommended drive cycles broken down by OEM. So I can share that with Fairfax, and you guys can push it out accordingly. That's kind of like a baseline of what each car requires. Now, a specific system like a blind spot system or a forward collision warning system or something like that may have a specific drive cycle unique to that system, but at least the shops will have some idea of how far they need to drive this thing. And one thing I would say is that reading and clearing the code doesn't fix anything. If the problem remains, all it has to go through is the frequency counter, and then the DTC is present again, and or can turn on a mill light. So, just clearing it and sending it in and not, it's going to rear its ugly head at some point. So drive cycles are going to be a bigger part of what we do as repairs, and identifying how far, how long, what direction, forward, reverse, lane changes, all those things need to be identified on what you're working on. And you're going to see even just removing an air cleaner, because you're putting in a core support or something like that, that there's going to be a specific drive cycle and or scan tool reset that's required. So it comes back to identifying each individual component that you're taking off. What are you unplugging, and how is it supposed to work? The one with a customer deleting their fault codes, like I said, just clearing it's not going to fix it. So make sure you get your drive cycle in play, and if you see something, bring it to their attention as soon as possible.
Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. We are at the end of our call. I just want to thank Jake, Doug, and Bram for being so open, so educational I want to thank everyone on this call for asking so many wonderful, thought-provoking questions. And thank you all so much. Our next call is, oh my goodness, my screen just went away for a second. Our next call is on Thursday. I got it. Thank you. Thursday, April 12th at 11 a.m. Pacific. We look forward to seeing you all there.